Hi, I'm Gary Angel, CEO of Digital Mortar. Thanks for joining part 2 of this series on how to use the pathing tool in DM1 to answer basic questions about the way customers navigate a space. If you haven't viewed part 1, please do, because I'm not going to go over all that stuff again about the space that we're working with, how it works, and some of the core tools. We're just going to dive right in. In part 1, the question I asked was, what's the most common path in a location? In part 2, I'm going to drill down and make that a little more specific. Someone comes in and says, well, I have a particular area in mind, in this case, the self-service kiosks, which are up here in this part of the location, and I want to know, how did people navigate the space? What did they do before going to self-service kiosks? And I may have that question at 2 levels. One, just what's the navigational path through the space to get to self-service kiosks? But then a deeper question, what did people do functionally? Where did they actually spend time before they went to self-service kiosks? All right, let's take a look at using the path tool to answer that question. Here's the raw undifferentiated path tool. This is every single path on the site for the day I've picked. Keep in mind, you don't have to pick a particular day here. You can pick a month, you can pick a week, you can pick any set of days or a year. I'm just working with a really small set of data to illustrate the points here. So here's all the paths in the space, but what I'm interested in is people who went to the self-service kiosk area. In part 1, I showed you a little bit about how to use path filter. Here, I'm going to use these top filters to illustrate how you can take any path set you return and then whittle it down to look at just the paths that are of interest to you. And in this case, the paths that are of interest to me are the self-service kiosk paths. So I'm just going to say, only show me paths if it has SSK in it. Now I've got the set of paths where people used the self-service kiosk. But as I look at these paths, one of the things that I can see is, and this is a real issue when it comes to physical location analytics, people go to the self-service kiosk without really going and using the self-service kiosk because they will pass through that area on their way to the drop-off area. And I can see that as I study these paths. So someone who spent 2 seconds or 3 seconds or less than 1 second in the self-service kiosk area, they didn't really use the self-service kiosk area. They were just passing through it. On the other hand, someone who spent 1:55 in the self-service kiosk area, they were actually using those kiosks the way we think of those kiosks being used. So how do I get rid of that? Well, I already showed you in the first one how you can use path filter. This is an incredibly important, common thing to do. One of the most common things I'm going to do is get rid of steps that didn't meet a certain basic quality of time. So in this case, I'm going to enter 3 seconds. 3 seconds is the minimum, and I can see that a lot of times as people pass through that SSK, they're really spending less than that. So hopefully that'll whittle it down quite a bit. Now I've got this all paths, but only those paths steps where people spent at least 3 seconds. I'm going to go back and restore my SSK. Whenever you set a path filter, it re-cleans out the path. I'm not sure if that's a good behavior or not, but that's the way it works. So I'm going to go back and say, no, I just want to see the SSK ones. Now I can see pretty clearly, okay, these are the areas that people visited. I can see it's not uncommon for people to go walkways and spend a little more time there than the minimum and get to SSK. But here I can look and start to see, well, here's a case where someone went supplies, drop-off area, spent a significant amount of time there, then supplies, then spent a significant amount of time in the SSK. Likewise here, not much time. Those are the 3 seconds. Many people just go to the self-service kiosk and don't spend more than 3 seconds anywhere else. So here I'm starting to get a sense about how people navigate the space and what they did before they went to SSK, if they did anything. I can even crisp this up a little more. One of the things I can do, since I'm only interested in what people did before the SSK, is only show the part of the paths that go up to the SSK, the show to SSK. Now, every path is going to include SSK, and every path is going to end with the self-service kiosk. Now I'm just getting the behaviors of that path up to, and this really cleans it up even more, where I can see that there's now a significant chunk of paths that are just meeting a certain criteria. Here, as I go through these, I can see, yeah, okay, I'm starting to get a sense about some of the most common behaviors around this, and I can page through this to see the different kinds of things people did, whether that's supplies or just linger in the walk-off areas, or whether they did drop-offs at a significant amount of time. those seem to be the most common behaviors of people going through and doing something before SSK. And I can see from this exactly how people navigated the space. And keep in mind, if I want to answer that more fundamental question, just how did people get to the SSK? Well, all I have to do to get back to that is go and take away this path filter. So let's go back, reapply that to 0. And now I want to go back and I want to say I want to look to SSK, and I want to only show if path has SSK. Well, probably I've already got that because I've got the show too. So that's really not going to make any difference. But now I'm seeing every case of SSK. You'll notice that it's quite possible for a customer to actually visit the self-service kiosk multiple times. Now I can see the actual geographic pathways that people went here. It's almost always going to be walkways, but there are going to be times where people go from drop-off into SSK, for instance. That's a perfectly viable pathway that people can do. But keep in mind, the physical location here is actually constraining the navigation paths when you're talking about physically having to go from one area to the next. So that's the way you use the path tool to answer questions about how did people get to a particular area of the site, usually by picking all the paths, refining it to pick that particular area, and then applying path filters to get rid of the noise that you don't want in terms of just the basic physical navigation of the site. I hope that helps. In part 3 of this series, I'm going to look at an even more complicated question. Do people use the work area if they are also using self-service kiosks? And we'll look at how that works with the pathing tool. Thanks a lot for joining.